All right. Well, welcome everybody to our April 1st Saturday seminar. This is going to be our last Zoom seminar. So we will be going back to in-person next May or next month in May. And our staff, Audrey and Rob, will be presenting on some of the plastics work that we're doing. So be sure to come in person to that one. But we appreciate you all coming out this morning for our April seminar. Just a couple updates. If you don't follow us already, please make sure you do. E-newsletter, social media. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. I know many of you already know him, but Roger Shew is a geology and environmental science professor at UNCW and has been teaching there since 1999. He is interested in water and energy resources, coastal plain ecosystems, and other sustainability issues. And he has served on the board of directors at Cape Fear River Watch since 2008. He additionally volunteers with the Coastal Federation and the Nature Conservancy. He grew up in Brunswick County and he worked in the energy industry for 20 years. And so I'm going to turn it on over to him and he's going to be presenting today about our energy use in the coast of North Carolina.
Thank you, Marissa, and good to see everyone. I don't know why you're on this thing with the beautiful weather outside, but I appreciate it. And I'll try to get through so that you guys can get outside and enjoy this fantastic day. Okay, just as a check, Marissa, can you see everything and hear everything? All right.
Yep, everything looks good.
Excellent. So a lot that's been going on in the past couple of years on the energy front. And I thought what I would do is try to show you a couple of the pictures of current usage of energy, in particular look at North Carolina and kind of move into the wind, since that's the really hot topic as of right now. So I'm going to cover a few things associated with this. And one of the main things to think about is, can North Carolina be electricity independent? Because we certainly can't be energy independent with crude oil needed for our transportation, at least right now. So let's take a look and see what we're going to have relative to energy. And the first picture, just to show an outline of what I'm going to try and do today. I'm going to talk about potential for self-sufficiency, but also to do that, you got to talk about the amount of energy that we use all the time. The thing down below is a picture just to illustrate, some of the different electricity sources that we have, of the ones I'm going to primarily talk about anyway. You can see the purple things, those are sites for nuclear energy in the state, from Charlotte to Raleigh and down in Southport area. We've got one wind farm out here in North Carolina, up in the northeastern part of the state. And with a little bit of time, I wanted to make a couple of comments relative to this that's really driving our ideas of looking at sea level and climate, some other things, because that's really the focus of what some of these energy changes are. As of 2021 and the Global Energy Review, this is really showing you a couple of things. Number one is that you see the big drop off in energy usage, and this is showing GDP, gross domestic product, energy demand, and CO2 emissions. So this was COVID. This is still COVID, but post-COVID of 2020. And what you can see with this is that for the most part, everything has recovered. Certainly GDP has shot up. Energy demand has returned to even higher levels than what it was in 2019 as of the end of last year. And CO2 emissions are getting there as well. And in fact, in 2021, we saw a 4.6% rise in energy demand to get us back to where we really were prior to 2020. And of course, who's driving all that? It's always good to look globally a little bit as well. And what this is showing you is what we call the OECD and non-OECD countries. The OECD countries, as you see there, those would be the ones like United States, Canada, EU, Japan, etc. What you can see as of now and also going forward is that energy consumption in those regions is basically flat to only slightly increasing. That's because of some of the efficiencies that we're looking at in those countries and the difference between those in looking at countries that include China, India, South Africa, and all the developing countries in Africa. This is where the big increases in energy consumption are projected to be, as you can see there. And of course, one of the big issues that we've got in these countries, particularly in India and China, is that even though they're doing a lot with renewables, they're still doing a lot with coal and the others. So doubling of energy consumption is going to occur in those non-OECD countries. And I'm going to, forgive me if I move through these rather quickly because I have a lot to go. And I think one of the things in setting these up, if you're interested, I'd be happy to talk to you individually or group-wise or others about all these different topics. But I really want to get to the point of North Carolina here. But again, setting the stage. So here's the world in primary energy consumption by source. What you can see here: petroleum in brown, natural gas in blue, coal in black, and renewable shown here in green. And the one that's really been rising, of course, is the renewables. So woohoo, we've got a lot of those going. Nuclear stays about the same. But one of the things as you look at here from the 2020 reference year to 2050, even with that big increase in renewables, you might see that there's still a huge demand relative to fossil fuels as well. And if you do the calculations for that, what you see here in 2020 versus 2050, you're still looking at 69 to 70% energy use of fossil fuels by 2050. Now, some projections are much lower than that, but no projections are having that down to what a lot of people are suggesting relative to the Paris Accord and the Copenhagen agreements of last year, that is needed to reduce emissions to get us to the point of the 1.5 to 2 degree C rise as we see it. And in fact, if you look at the global greenhouse gas emissions, you can see them here, 2000 through 2021. You can see that coal is still the #1 issue in the world relative to greenhouse gas emissions, also natural gas, et cetera. And what you can see down below is some of the countries that are responsible. You might notice that coal accounted for 40% of CO2 growth in 2021. Well, where did that occur? It occurred in China and India. As you see here in the CO2 emissions in some of the developed world like US, European Union, Japan, it's actually been going down since about 2005. There was a slight uptick over 2020, obviously, as shown there. That's the COVID year. But we recouped, but we're not back up to where 2005, which a lot of people consider the record year is. But look at the CO2 emissions in China. China is #1 in implementation of renewable energy, but it's still utilizing, because of all the production that's there, lots of other sources. And I just wanted to show you that really quickly. So this is China and India. And what this is showing, the things in yellow are coal plants. And what you're seeing in the purples and whatever that is, magenta, those are under construction or planned coal plants. So what you can see is they're still utilizing a lot of these. And what you might notice, for instance, in China, look at the difference. That's 199 gigawatts versus 992 gigawatts of energy from coal from that 20-year period. India, likewise, growing really big. So coal is still a big thing for these guys. And you might compare that with the US. These are the coal plants in the US. And you might see that there's no magenta or purple here. And that's because no coal plants have been built in the United States since 2013. So we still have a lot, but you might even notice that it's reducing in number. And that's because of retirements that are occurring, with coal plants. And in North Carolina here, we have quite a few retirements. So let me show you a little history here. This goes all the way back to 1950 through 2021. You can see here lots of different things. Those of you who are around like I was in the 70s, remember the oil embargo that occurred back in the early 70s, where prices really skyrocketed and people waited in line to get gas. I was pumping gas to put my way through college back then. And I would sit there and just pump the gas, and another car would come up and you pump it. You'd sell out all your gas in an hour because there was that much demand for it at that time. And you notice that the differences, particularly in petroleum, where this hit the hardest, was recession, and COVID. Those are all big drops that we had in petroleum usage because of transportation phenomena. Natural gas also dropped a little bit in some of these because that's used for energy industry as well as commercial and industrial. The other thing you might notice here, the big year of reference is 2005. The world changed in 2005. What you might notice here, look at coal. Coal since 2005 has really been dropping. There was not a war on coal starting in 2016, as was stated by some people. The war on coal really was related to the increase in natural gas, oil, and also renewables that started occurring in 2005. And of course, what happened in 2005 relative to natural gas and oil was horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing. That changed everything. I never would have thought that we would have been in the position we are today with production in the United States back in 2000, even after working in the energy industry for many, many years. So anyway, this is looking at primary energy production in the United States. Notice the big increase in natural gas and oil and renewables, and the big drop in coal. And this is primary energy consumption. As you might notice here, our consumption has dramatically increased with natural gas, dramatically decreased with coal once again. And contrary to what some people believe, what's happened in the energy industry over time is that the United States actually became the #1 natural gas producer way back in 2011. That's over the entire world. It didn't happen, in the past few years. This happened years ago. And in fact, you can see the rise that the blues are the United States, the light blue is natural gas, the dark blue is oil. So right here is where we became the producer of record for natural gas. And right here is where we became producer of record for oil. But you can see that the oil had started going way up, way back in here as well. So these were pretty watershed years for us. And so now we actually export these commodities over what we used to do, which was import a large amount of these. The other thing I'll bring up is a lot of people of late have said that the natural gas production in the US has dropped and that we're not producing as much and we need to get back in gear. Well, that's not true either. If you look at 2021, the end of 2021, we were actually producing more natural gas in this country than what we were producing pre-COVID. So people give you wrong information. And I just want everybody to understand that we should look at the facts of the matter before we start judging, what's going on. And so related to that then and all that production, you look at the energy-related carbon dioxide emissions, as shown here. We call it by sector, which means transportation, industrial, electric power, residential, and commercial. Those are the sectors. And then over on the right-hand side, we see, what's producing those CO2 emissions. So this point right in there in 2016 was an important one. Notice that transportation became the #1 supplier of CO2 to the atmosphere that year over electric. So why did we see that big drop? Well, see this record year of 2005, that's whenever coal started dropping. And the drop in coal, since that is the #1 emitter of carbon dioxide and many other pollutants, the drop in that is what led to the change that we had. So that brings up another issue for us in considering transportation, which is dominated certainly by crude oil consumption. And in fact, we are ones that utilize a lot of energy. This is a picture showing you how much we drive. So I know you guys are out there driving around. And what you're seeing there is that in the US, we drive over 3.2 trillion miles annually. You might notice there's COVID. So people are sheltering in place, not driving near as much, but we're recovering from that as too now as we're moving into 2022. So we have 290 million cars and trucks on the road in the United States, give or take. The average miles driven per year is about 11,000 miles per year by vehicles, and the average miles per gallon of all those vehicles right now is about 25. So how are we doing? Well, it turns out that the electric global market for car sales and truck sales is about, give or take, 8 to 9% of the market as we see it. So we still are using primarily crude oil for all of this. So one of the things we look at in this is, where are we going? Well, electric vehicle sales have been increasing, but there's still not a lot. As you see here, 6.5 million EVs were sold in 2021. And when you look at that, 535,000 of them were in the United States. And of course, everybody looks at the Tesla as the car of today. And one of the big things about this, though, globally, is that sales of these EVs have doubled in 2021. Many people are looking at planning of 50% sales in electric plug-in hybrids by 2030. And this has been a big push of the Biden administration, looking at the infrastructure bill, putting in charging stations, around the country as a big deal. But this also brings up an issue, which is another big topic that we can talk about. You got to put batteries together for these things, right? So where is all that material going to come from for our batteries? If you look at the Tesla Model 3 here, a third to half the weight of many of the EVs are actually in the battery packs that you have. And these, of course, use a lot of materials like nickel, lithium, and cobalt. So where do we get those? Well, we get those globally, and oftentimes it's been developed mines in poorer areas, such as in Africa. Turns out that the United States has lots of lithium, but we chose not to mine any of that because it was cheaper elsewhere. And now, as you can see here, per ton of these materials, look at the price. So these are some of the issues that we've got going forward in usage. Increases of 280 to 400% increase in usage for some of these different elements, commodities that we need for those. And of course, North Carolina, by the way, has a lithium source. In fact, it has some really good quality lithium that's being looked at for opening mines west of Charlotte. So this is really something that is a key to going forward. But what do? A lot of people are opposed to mining, of course, because there's issues with mining, as we all know. Sometimes there's trade-offs in the world. So renewables became the second most prevalent U.S. electricity source in 2020. And I'm going to be talking primarily about electricity because that's something that we have more control of here in North Carolina as opposed to the transportation issue. Notice that natural gas is the biggest. Then we've got renewables, nuclear, and coal has dramatically declined. In fact, many people believe that we're going to be continuing to increase this. The Energy Information Administration, which is the go-to site for finding things about energy, shows here that in 2021, this is what we were utilizing. About 56% renewables and nuclear, fossil fuels about 44%. Now again, this is only electricity. And if you look at just the renewable part, you can see here, the biggest renewable right now is wind, but going forward, solar is the bigger growth factor as we see this. And in fact, wind actually replaced hydro as the #1 source of renewable energy back in 2016, 2017. So what's going on in the energy industry? Well, coal is going away. What this is showing you is that we have above the zero line are additions of plants. We're adding electricity generating capacity, and below that line are retirements of different plants. And so what you see here is there's 2013, that was the last coal plant built. And what do you see going forward? A lot of black below that line. And in fact, in 2022, this is projection for this year, is that all of that, 85% of the retirement is going to be in coal. About 12 gigawatts. That's a lot. That's about 24 coal plants, by the way. So these retirements that you see here are pretty important. So what's been the details of going on in the last 2 years? Well, here's 2021, what we added. Solar was 39% of the additions of electricity generation, wind 31%, and natural gas 16%. This is all US data. So what's it estimated for 2022? Solar is going to be the big addition, followed by natural gas, wind, and I'm going to start putting in batteries. See this battery stuff in 2021? Now we got batteries. This is really, really important because this is now going to become one of our sources, since we can store this and then bring it out for use as we move and need it for, making up some of the things that we have for solar and wind, as a matter of fact. This is really, really big. I can't emphasize this enough. I mean, this really is a huge sea change in 10 years. I'll show you what happened in North Carolina in a minute. So what happened in the last decade? Capacity additions in renewables in the last decade, there's solar, onshore wind, biomass, offshore wind, etc. Huge, huge. And then capacity additions by area. Who's the biggie? It's China, by far over everybody else. Now, if you did by individual countries, Europe would not be up there. This is the entire EU. The United States would be #2 in this. So one of the things that we look at is, can we be powered by 100% renewable energy? Well, many studies have shown that yes, we can. And how do we get there? So I'm going to offer a few studies that you guys can take a look at, while you're reading at the beach or wherever you go out to, and take a look and see, what we can do. Because according to many studies, we can move to 50 to 80% with just a little bit of commitment. And in fact, 20 states have already committed to 100% renewable energy goals. Believe it or not, North Carolina is one of those states. So let's get to North Carolina. So there's North Carolina with all the different things. The little yellows are solar, we got hydro, we got etc. Down on the bottom of this is obviously North Carolina at night, showing you the different places. For instance, there's Charlotte, there's Raleigh area, Fayetteville, here's Wilmington. Way over there is Atlanta. So if you look at these things, we're using a lot of energy. So these are the locations of all our electricity generating plants in North Carolina. You might notice we've got natural gas. And by the way, this one right here, that natural gas is the one that was replacing the coal that was over on 421. That happened in 2013 here. There's our nuclear, hydroelectric, still got coal plants, got our one wind plant, and all these are solars. There's a lot of solar facilities in North Carolina. So what happened in North Carolina in just 10 years? Well, coal went from #1 in 2010 to #3 by 2019. And what you see here is natural gas in 2019 was #2, followed by nuclear. Now, here's total renewables in 2010. That's hydropower and biomass is what we have. So add those two together. But now we've got hydropower and biomass plus other renewables that are the solars and the winds to add to that. So that line is now way out there. Within the next couple of years, that will replace coal. And so coal will become #4 in North Carolina. So just to highlight, this is continuing. So there's what I just showed you for 2019. Well, 2020 mix had a little bit of change. Nuclear in that year was #1, followed by natural gas. And there's coal and renewables. And note that solar was the largest of our renewables in 2020. So big changes have occurred. So let's get to what can we do. So what is supplied for us in these areas? Can we increase nuclear, solar, and wind so that we can become energy independent for electricity in North Carolina? Well, nuclear has maxed out. I don't think many people are thinking there's going to be more plants built, although I'm actually a proponent, particularly in the near term to intermediate term for nuclear, because it is a clean fuel. Problem with nuclear is, of course, the cost and then the waste generated. But we can do some things with the waste. That's another story. Wind, we're very small, but what's the limits on that? That's the focus for me today anyway. So, and then we got solar. 2021, we were doing greater than 8%. So very quickly, there's our 3 plants for nuclear. And you might notice here the Brunswick plant, 1,800 megawatts or 1.8 gigawatts. That's equivalent to 3 coal plants. This one down here, the McGuire plant up near Charlotte, that's equivalent to 4 coal plants. So these are significantly big areas to maintain for what we've got. And each of these plants has, commissioned to try and, upgrade their facilities to get an extension, because many of these have like a 30-year lifespan, which they've already reached really. And so whenever you're looking at these things, you're having to upgrade and make sure these meet today's requirements. And this costs money as well. So many of these have already got the 10 to 20 year extension of life, if you want to call it that. How about solar? Well, it turns out North Carolina was actually #2 in solar just a few years ago. Unfortunately, we've dropped a little, but we're still #4 in the country in installed capacity for solar. So we've been doing really well. Now, of course, some of the renewable energy mandates and also, some of the subsidies associated with this have helped out tremendously. North Carolina has a 12.5% renewable energy mandate. But you can see here that, California, Texas, Florida, and North Carolina, this is really huge for us. And if you look in detail at that, 4th national ranking, but a lot of things are positive about this. It's not just the capacity that we got in percentage of electricity. It's really that there's been a lot of jobs and investments in North Carolina relative to this. So you can see here the solar energy investments and also all the jobs associated with it. Lots of opportunities. Cape Fear Community College, as a matter of fact, does quite a bit with solar, and we've got several companies here in town that look at this. Just as a quickie, because this isn't my focus today, here's the top 10 solar farms in the US, 7 in California, Nevada, and Arizona. This one in Nevada is really huge. This is almost 1.5 coal plants for a solar facility. And we have both the big photovoltaics, but also the ones that do the thermal solar. But anyway, that's just to show you some of the sizes of those. So those are the ones in North Carolina, in the United States. Notice they're all out in the great Southwest. Not many clouds, clear skies, biggest solar capacity in the country. And of course, what's big globally? Well, China is big. Look at this one. And of course, to be some artsy work there, they created a solar horse, if you will. And so look at this one, this is the size of a nuclear plant. So these are really, really big things. And by the way, everybody's trying to outdo everybody else in solar. It's just like wind. Everybody's trying to get the biggest one of these going. So let's take a look at wind. Here's a stat for you. China built more offshore wind energy in 2021 than every other country built in 5 years. See that? That's really, really big. Now, in looking at this, there is China, and these are the projections going forward. United States is number 2, but there's a little gap there because China is so much further in this graph than everybody else. You might also notice in looking at this, these are capacity additions in 2021. That's China, rest of the world. China has this relative to the rest of the world. So, you know, when I look at that, I see opportunity lost for the United States for economy and other things. So this is something that we should be thinking about. And just since everybody wants the big, just to show you the big in wind, largest offshore wind farm, $8 billion. This is not small potatoes. And these are huge turbines. This is a 13 megawatt turbine. These are over 800 feet tall. And a lot of people are getting into this more and more. The UK has historically been the #1 in offshore, but China is displacing them. And Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister in the UK, has said that we need to be a world leader in low-cost clean power generation. And with the Ukrainian issue, they want to be able to replace the need for Russian fuel for electricity generation as well, because all of the European Union uses a lot of natural gas, obviously from Russia. So there's lots of benefits to wind. You guys know all these things. Lots of investments, $131 billion of investments, $18 billion alone in 2021. Helps avoid CO2. What's been done so far is equivalent of removing 69 million cars, as it shows here. So lots of potential for energy, lots of potential for jobs and reduction of emissions. So how has the US done? Well, in 2000, this was the picture. California was the #1 producer of wind energy. You can see nothing in the Southeast. By 2010, Texas had become #1 and displaced California. And in fact, Iowa had become #2 over California as well. By 2020, this is what you had, 122 gigawatts of installed capacity. That's an increase, by the way, of over 4,000%. So where is all this? So I looked at 2021, we installed 13 gigawatts, so we're now up to 135 gigawatts in the US, and only 42 megawatts of that are in the offshore, 30 in Rhode Island, and there's 12 in those pilot programs off of Virginia. So we haven't done a whole lot in the offshore world yet. If you look at the installed wind capacity for the United States by year, there's what you see. And if you look at net electricity generation by state, Texas is #1. But if you look at the amount generated by just wind energy for the total electricity, look at Iowa, 58% of their energy comes from wind. Oklahoma, 35, Kansas, 43. So even though Texas is the biggie, these guys are supplying a large percentage of their electricity from wind. So there's our wind energy potential map that you see. Of course, this is Tornado Alley. All the offshore areas like offshore West Coast and East Coast provide lots and lots of potential. And you might notice all the way from South Carolina north, huge wind potential for this area. Let's take a quickie look on the onshore. These are the areas of the country where we have wind energy farms that provide lots of stuff. And I highlight this one right there. That's our own farm, the Amazon wind farm in northeastern part of the state. It's near Elizabeth City up here. And this particular one is one, as we see shown there, 104 turbines. Those turbines are 2 megawatt turbines. They're about 500 feet tall. And in looking at this, by the way, there is one turbine up at Appalachian State that's 100 kilowatt. That's not providing a whole lot of energy. There is potential in the mountains of North Carolina, but there's a hilltop rule saying that above 4,000 feet, you can't do things that harm the aesthetics. This is one of the farm turbines being installed up in northeastern North Carolina. Lots of property taxes, some workers involved, and big area, which is one of the big things about this. But you can also farm around those. It's not like you're taking land out of usage by putting in these turbines. So this has been the growth in turbines over the years, starting out in California. These early small ones basically killed a lot of birds. Going to the big ones as we move today. A couple of things with these, they put these in the valley passes. So, that's where a lot of the birds would migrate through. These also spin a lot faster than what they do today. So those were basically Cuisinarts, chopping up the birds. And so now what you see out here in some of these much larger ones as we move into the offshore world, it's a very different matter. Also, these have a much lower capacity factor, meaning they don't operate efficiently or all the time. So these were like 20% capacity factor. These new larger ones, like that 13 megawatt, it's up to 60% capacity factor. That rivals natural gas and coal for the capacity factor. So this has been a big, big change. And in fact, the structure types now that we move offshore with, are being ones that we're having larger and larger facility. This breakover zone is about 50 meters offshore to 60 meters where we have fixed to the seafloor versus floaters. And there's just been a study come out from BOEM talking about, how all these different structures, can impact the seafloor and migration and types of critters that are there. So this is a modern big guy. This is a 13 megawatt in 40 meters of water, size of Eiffel Tower. This is the nacelle area. This is where you attach the turbine blades to, and this is the piece. All those people there illustrate the size of those things. These are gigantic structures. And then that's one of the blades. You can see the people lined up there on there. I mean, just giant things. And this change that we've had has gone from 9 to 11, now considering 16 to 18 megawatters in the future. So what's the potential energy that we have for these? Well, there you can see North Carolina, actually on the East Coast, has some of the largest potential going. In fact, larger than many, many other states as we have them. And of course, we have a couple of areas of interest for us of Kitty Hawk and now Wilmington that some of you have been hearing about of late. There's the offshore areas that are under consideration shown in pink. These are ones that are considered for BOEM leasing and planning areas. So there's the Kitty Hawk area, and this is the Wilmington area. Down below, you can see what's coming. See North Carolina here. Looks like we might be starting production by 2027 with that Kitty Hawk area, and it's going to be built in 3 increments, get us up to this larger volume. As you see, it's going to be about 800 megawatts at a time. And of course, these are billions of dollars that we're considering here. U.S. has a target of 30 gigawatts for the offshore, 40 gigawatts hopefully to be installed by 2035. And just to give you a number, 1 gigawatt will power 380,000 homes. So whenever Kitty Hawk is done, we're going to be powering over, about 1 million homes with that one. And this is the projection by state over the next years to 2035. I don't want to spend too much time on this. You see North Carolina there in the light blue. So these are ones that we're looking at for installation with North Carolina, but you can see up and down the coast. By the way, Biden's goal is 30 gigawatts by 2030. So it's 30 by 30 is what some people are calling that. So what about North Carolina? So North Carolina has exquisite wind power. What you can see here is anything over a class 4, as we call it, which everything off of Carolina is class 4 or above. That is considered to be utility scale wind potential. So let's focus in on our area. So Department of Commerce has done a study looking at offshore wind and the economic benefits of this, full-time jobs, earnings of $1 billion, economic output of $4 billion, creation of 28,000 full-time jobs, and looking at these different JEDI models, as they call them. That's just jobs and economic development impact. So that's the high model. This one is the low model, if you will. So even out there for potential. So the North Carolina wind energy areas we got is this one, which has already been leased as of 2017 to Evandrid, which is a subsidiary of a Spanish company, Iberdrola. And you can see here 2014, 17. So what's the projections? 2026, the first of those 800 megawatt zones will be built. March 21st, Governor Cooper of 2021 said, we need to get going. It's not just Kitty Hawk, we need to move on other areas. And one of the reasons they were saying this is because there is a moratorium on production of offshore wind energy that comes into play in July of this year, unless the Biden administration takes executive order to change that. So in looking at these, wind energy area west has been excluded. That one's been dropped. The wind energy area east is the one that's up for bid right now. People are looking at it, and there's going to be an official bid that's going to go out to BOEM. They're going to announce the winner on May 11th for this thing. So in looking at this moratorium, just to bring up, what that was Trump signed that memorandum in 2020. Basically, he was wanting to get boats in Florida to North Carolina. So he took off the plate all the offshore oil and gas, but that also included wind. So unless something's done to change this, in July of this year, this moratorium will go into place. So this bid in May 11th, if it doesn't take it off the table, if they get the bid in, then that will be kind of like grandfathered in so they can continue to do the work. I think they should just do away with the memorandum myself. And in fact, North Carolina with Governor Cooper instituted a task force. They call it the Towers Task Force, NC Towers. And so that refers to the Task Force for Offshore Wind. Executive Order 218 is to say that we're going to have 2.8 gigawatts in North Carolina by 2030. That's really looking at Kitty Hawk, but to have 8 by 2040. So this is including areas like the wind energy area off the Wilmington or Bald Head Island coast. So just a quickie look at this one. There is Evandrid. That's the leased area. 122,000 acres. First phase, 800 megawatts. Construction actually will put things on the ground or the seafloor in 2024. And they're going to start off with 69 turbines that are like 12 megawatts of capacity. So by the way, this energy is going to Virginia. It's not coming to North Carolina. So why didn't we put it closer? Well, that's because the National Park Service said it needed to be 33 nautical miles away so nobody could see it from the Body Island Lighthouse. And of course, Kitty Hawk said, we don't want it within 20 nautical miles because we don't want to be able to see those things from the shore. Affects my property values and affects my aesthetics for the area. So what about this one? Well, this one has been dropped. This was the wind energy area west. This gap here is because of shipping, the navigation lanes coming out of the Cape Fear River. So this is the area being looked at. This is about 17 nautical miles after they now modified it offshore. So again, the beaches in Brunswick were asking for it to be at least 24 nautical miles offshore. And people were worried. They said, well, is this going to affect my fish migrations? Is it going to affect my livelihood? People saying I'm not against wind energy or solar or anything, but it doesn't need to be stuck in my face. And I didn't buy a vacation home at the beach to look at a wind turbine. Okay, so these are comments that, people are concerned about property values and aesthetics, tourism, which is a big thing in North Carolina. So I thought I would show you a couple of pictures that illustrates this. So the bids for these two areas are going to be divided into two areas for bidding. So people can bid on either one or both areas. And by the way, there's 4 oil companies bidding on this too. Shell, BP, Total, all those companies are bidding on these too, because they see some of the writing on the wall that you need to move into other means. So let's take a look at a picture of a site as you see it. There's the area. The area for bidding starts at 17 nautical miles. They moved it offshore. It was to start at 15, but they moved it to 17. So there is 15 nautical miles of what you would see with the turbines. See them out there? So what about 20 nautical miles? So there's 20 nautical miles. Most of these are at greater than 20 nautical miles, as a matter of fact. So personally, I would like to see them closer, but that's my opinion. But putting these off the coast is what people are looking at now. So the question for you is, can we be electricity independent? Well, we're not going to change nuclear most likely. But we do have some potential for these others. I think you see the potential with solar, not just household, but actually utility scale solar. But what about the wind? What would we need to do to supply electricity for North Carolina from wind? Now, I just showed you what we had from some of these other places. And by the way, just to highlight, let me go back for just a really quick second. This area, if you were to just take another 3 nautical miles here and put a strip, I would have enough wind potential that I could supply another 250,000 homes just by having another set of turbines for that 3-mile area. And you still wouldn't be able to see them very much. So how about wind? We got 4, give or take, 4.5 to 5 million homes in North Carolina. Now I'm just going to consider the homes now. We would need 7 wind farms the size of the Kitty Hawk area to supply all of North Carolina's homes. So can we do that? Well, yeah, we could, but you got to make a commitment. You can only go so far offshore because it becomes much more and more expensive as you move further offshore, as you move something from a fixed monopole like this one to something that is a tethered line to the seafloor. But also with this increasing capacity factor, we're getting better at this. So let's consider a couple of other things that we could do too, because some people have some issues with wind. In fact, there's always arguments for and against, right? So here's the arguments for wind: large supply, it's clean, obviously, widely available, particularly in the offshore, removes dependence on fossil fuels, lots of jobs. You don't need a lot of infrastructure for this, but you do need the grid. I will say that's a big issue. And actually in the offshore, that fishermen actually might like these because they create artificial reefs when you put those platforms or monopoles surrounded by a bunch of rocks in the area. So arguments against it: wind is not 24/7. I'm going to tell you, we're getting a lot better with this. Low capacity factors, well, now we're getting higher ones. Production tax credit subsidy, is required, but lots of people get production tax credits, including the oil and gas industry. Bird kill, storage, shadow flicker, aesthetics, pile driving, all these things are stuff that people bring up. Well, wind is the fourth largest electricity generator right now behind those other three. So there is lots of potential. But some of you that know me know that I'm a big advocate of conserving and also efficiency. We could supply a quarter of that need just by doing things of efficiencies and conservation in this country. That's another topic for another day, but believe me, I can show you how to reduce 10% of your energy relatively easy. So those of you who are bird lovers, as I am, some people have come up with ideas to reduce the bird deaths. One of them is to have a blade painted black. This is still under study, but this is one of the things that people have looked at. Some other considerations is don't put them in the flight pathways, the migration areas. Some people have even suggested you can have sensors that indicate when large migration occurs. That's really expensive, so I'm not sure they're going to be doing that one. Of course, one of the things that we can do is we can fix a feral cat and keep them from killing the birds too. That's not keeping birds from being killed by the turbines, but it certainly reduces the number of bird kills in the country. Now, this is obviously onshore, so we need to consider things offshore and perhaps that coloring of the blade and others. But I'm going to tell you, these blades move so much slower and are so much more efficient. It's not like those old turbines that are just whipping around, have that tendency. And the new turbines also don't have places for things to try to roost on either, because they have these slick kind of curved surfaces that are there. So we do need to consider our wildlife. I'll be the first one to say this. In fact, BOEM did a mapping study in Wilmington East. They've looked at the subfloor and the numbers of fishies and stuff that are in these areas. We should do those kinds of studies. Duke is going to do a big study on energy effects on marine life. And, we know that things, can be impacted. We have significant critical area off the North Carolina coast, particularly off of Wilmington, for the right whale. And of course, there's the avian strikes, but also marine migrations and others. So this will be an important study. You want to know what's there before you go out and do something. So one of the problems with this is, even with everything that's planned, the trajectory for North Carolina is that we're not going to meet our climate goals. This just came out as we looked at it. Governor Cooper issued Executive Order 80, warning a 40% reduction in emissions below 2005 levels. What we've got currently, doing pretty well, but only 27% is what's projected. And turns out that there's no real plans going forward that are going to reduce that further. Looks like things are kind of flat. So we need to do some more stuff, because what we've seen is electricity demand goes up, in particular with air conditioning. Air conditioning is our #1 use. And you might see here that decades of warming in North Carolina been increasing. You might also know that seasonal warming is occurring. You can see here, look at the winter time. So I'm not going to need as much, heating, but I'm going to need a lot more cooling in these areas. And of course, when you look at this, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, one of the big ones is affordable and clean energy for the globe. That's number 7 of all of these things that we look at for sustainability. So how are we doing? Well, CO2 is continuing to go up. That was the average for 2021. So by 2022, this year, it's going to average 418 to 419. And here you can see the temperature increase as we see. 2021 was the 6th biggest year on record. For the United States, it was 4th. What you can see here is the increase is moving up. And of course, what does that increasing temperature do for us too? It leads to sea level rise. These are the projections with the business as usual case for the high sea level. That's because of increasing temperatures. This is what we have for our mitigation case. And even with the mitigation case, we're still going to see rising sea levels. And this is the gauge underneath the Cape Fear River Memorial Bridge for the tide gauge. This is what all of you've been hearing about lately for our area. You can see that it's increasing. It is not linear. This is accelerating. So that leads me to just a few comments I wanted to make relative to this, because this is related to what we're doing for energy. And I know some of you may have to go to do other things, but I wanted to take 5 minutes or so to illustrate, a couple of impacts of this, because I think one of the things we need to consider is one thing is actually hooked to the other. You can't take things separately in this world. It's integrated, and whenever I'm looking at energy, I think about everything else too. And I think that's how we should consider it. So this picture of the Cape Fear River here, there's the Cape Fear River. This is the Northeast Cape Fear River. And you've all heard about this area right here from the Isabel Holmes Bridge down past the battleship. So whenever we're having that increasing temperature that then leads to increasing sea level, that precipitates quite a few things. So this is a topographic map, if you will, color key. So the red colors are higher, the blue colors are lower. So you might notice here, this is Eagles Island. This is going up Highway 421. So this is Leland, Navassa, and this is Wilmington. There's a reason why Wilmington built on this side of the river. It's high. And so right in this area is what we looked at. So let me just show you, see that red arrow right here? That's Point Peter, also called Battleship Point, and multiple other things. This is the point. That's the 421. So this is what it looks like. And this map over here is 1 foot contour intervals. So the water line is 0. So notice how much is 1 to 4 to 5 feet. Everything from here south is less than 5 feet. So everything there is less than 5 feet of elevation. And by the way, you see this area right in here, that's 2 feet of elevation. This is all marsh. That's all wetlands from there across here and in there. Okay. So let me just show you a couple of pictures. These are inundation maps with sea level rise. These are NOAA projections. I'm only using the new data. This just came out a month ago from NOAA. These are the 2022 projections, an intermediate and an intermediate high sea level. So this is what would be covered with 1 foot of sea level rise. This is 2 feet, 3 feet, and 4 feet. So the projections are by 2060, with the intermediate case, 1.5 feet, intermediate high about 2 feet. So I want to look at these. The reason I want to look at those is because on January, first week in January of this year, this is the picture. This is Battleship Road here. And this is Point Harbor Road that would go down to this area. And this arrow is pointing to this. I stood here and watched this little car go into here, and it shouldn't be going down. I tried to wave him down, but he kept going anyway. So he got down here on the road and stalled out because he watered out. This truck, which is much higher, had to tow him out. So this was at 2.3 feet of rise over mean highest high water. This is sea level at 2 feet above mean highest high water. This is what 2 feet is above mean highest high water. So this picture, I repeat, this picture and this one is what this area will look like every day in 2060. Did you hear me? 2060, this is the picture every day. Now, what do we want to do? On top of that, we have high tide flooding. So this is 2 feet of high tide flooding. So now what you want to do in 2060 is put 2 feet on top of this. because I'm going to put 2 feet of high tide flooding on top of that, right? Because that would be the picture in 2060. Okay, so that's 4 feet, right? So let me go back a sec. This is 4 feet. This is what I really would love to be able to show people this picture of, because they just don't understand that. At the meeting Thursday, they kept asking questions, but they didn't get to the point of showing these kinds of pictures. And I'd love to be able to take a half hour of time to illustrate to people exactly what these pictures show. And then if you make the decision to develop, that's fine. But at least take a look at the pictures and the data first. Because this is what happened on January 3rd. This is the gauge data. We had a slight moderate flooding event on January. No storm, no nothing. This was what we call perigeo high tide flooding. That was the 10th largest flooding event that we've had in the Wilmington area. Notice what Isaias was 4.3 feet. Florence, Matthew, Hazel, 1993 storm of the century, just onshore winds. Floyd, Josephine, Michael, but this one is just high tide flooding. So when are we going to have these things? Well, we're going to have more of them, because Wilmington is one of the sites with high tide flooding increasing, not just in a linear fashion, but in an exponential fashion. This is Water Street. That's Water Street. This is the road to the battleship with Matthew. And this is sunny day flooding. There's my Canada geese swimming in the battleship parking lot. There was also an egret fishing in the battleship parking area. So this is what we see for the base map. This is high tide flooding shown in red. So for those of you who like projections, here's what I'd like for you to do. And tell your friends, if they want to see water on the road, I want you to go over, particularly in June and July, on these dates, because these are going to be super moons, and this is going to be full moon. So whenever you have the coincidence of perigee, you see this perigee, this is the moon looks bigger. This is when the moon is closer to the earth. This is when it's further. But on these dates, it's going to be close. That's why I call it a super moon, really close. So on these times in here, I guarantee you, I repeat, I guarantee you there'll be water on the roads here. And this is what I'd like to do is to lead a field trip for our representatives out there on those days to show them, this kind of fact. So very quickly, let me just finish up. There is the increase in number of these flooding days going forward, as we see it. So what can we do? Well, the battleship is working to live with the water. This is the battleship parking lot underwater. They're looking at raising this area, but also putting in living shorelines and wetland areas to help mitigate some of these events. It's called living with water. I say development should live with water. You got to have that knowledge of what's going to be occurring now as well as in the future. So my opinion, particularly for Eagles Island, is to have this educational site next to the battleship that would have these kinds of things instead of massive structures in them. That would provide us with the opportunity that would give things for people to have ecotourism, recreation, education about our cultural, historical history. That's very rich, very, very rich in this area. So that's my pitch for today. And I think there's a lot of things that we can do and are doing in North Carolina. And I think we have lots of opportunity to look at, changing and improving the status that we have for energy picture as well as conservation of our lands and protection of those lands as well. So I'm going to stop there because my slide set says I have 444 on this particular document, so I better stop with that.
All right, thanks so much, Roger. That was really fantastic. And a good segue to our event coming up in June, which I dropped information about in our chat. But we have a State of the River event happening on June 1st, which is a Wednesday at Cape Fear Community College campus from 8 to 1. We have presentations from Riverwatch staff and board members, including Roger, to talk a little bit more about this and lots of other issues impacting the Cape Fear River Basin, complimentary pastries, lunch and coffee, and a panel discussion after lunch with some really great folks. So register, learn more in that link that I dropped in the chat. We'd love to see you there. And also, we were talking a lot about birds, and those who love birds, we also have a birding program, another birding program at Greenfield Lake happening on Monday, April 11th in the morning at 8:30. If anybody wants to attend that, feel free to reach out to me at marissa@cfrw.us. But we did have some questions. If anybody has questions, now is the time. You can unmute yourself and ask. But we'll start with one that popped up in the chat during the presentation. Roger, from Catherine, why is the power from wind off the North Carolina shore being sent to Virginia?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One of them is that the infrastructure is there in southeastern Virginia. There is no place as you bring the power onto the barrier islands to get it there. And so that is closer going to Virginia than actually trying to get it into a grid system or an infrastructure system in North Carolina. There are none right now. That could change, if we do the Wilmington area though. And a lot of things are by scale. Once you get more things in place, you have the opportunity to put in infrastructure that is then cost effective in these areas. But that's the real reason. You've got to have these sub-bottom cables, that carry that energy from the farm to an area. So the longer you have to do that cable, the more difficult it's going to be as well.
All right, and I see Dana, your hand's up.
Yes, thank you. Roger, I don't know how you do it, but this was my favorite of all of your presentations, and every time I say that. So this was amazing. So much awesome information. I have billions of questions, but I just want to ask you two right now because I'll just bend your ear the next time I see you. Why? So you show that map of the southeast region of inshore wind. Why is there nothing? Is there some sort of political reason or geographical reason or what? What's the deal?
There's a couple of reasons, and what Dana is referring to is the Southeast has no wind energy on shore. One of the things with that is the focus has been really with coal over the years and the cheapness of that. The other thing is that the wind energy potential there, if you look at utility scale wind, except near the coast, a lot of those areas don't have that kind of big wind potential that would provide the scale needed for an actual farm. So that's another reason. The other reason too, as I mentioned the renewable energy mandate, none of those states really have an energy mandate for renewable energy. So that's kept it down too. This is one reason North Carolina was really progressive in moving forward solar, because we saw that with a mandate, although some people hated it when it was put in place in 2007 to 8, this really pushed North Carolina to do some smart things relative to increasing our solar for the state. So, there's multiple reasons, but those are some of those.
Thank you. I just have one more. Sorry, Marissa. So you mentioned the cars and the fact that transportation was really high up in usage. And you talked about, reducing the travel. And I think it was last night or yesterday that Secretary of Energy Buttigieg announced the new standard for cars. I think it was 40 miles per gallon. I'm wondering if you think these things are actually going to affect the global emissions, or if we actually have to go farther into shipping and air travel.
Yeah, that's a full question. as we know, the average right now is 25, as an average fleet capacity for miles per gallon. What Obama put in place was to be actually 54 miles per gallon by 2026. The Trump administration reduced that down back to a maximum of 36 to 40. And then Biden has reinstituted, that. The problem with miles per gallon is it takes a while to do it. And so increasing the miles per gallons by, the corporate average fleet, as we call it, that's going to take years to do. Unfortunately, we should have been increasing in a gradual fashion over the years instead of being stagnant throughout the 90s and 2000, early 2000s, and keeping it the same, because we really haven't improved energy efficiency for miles per gallons very much at all. So to move that forward is going
Oh, it just seized up.
54 miles per gallon. So it's going to be a while to get the whole fleet into that kind of a position. One of the hope for the increasing efficiency is to move to hybrids and EVs if you really want to get to the point of drastic reduction in transportation, which is the #1 source of greenhouse gases. And with some of those incentives that are in place, that becomes a possibility. However, there are hurdles there with charging stations, as we know. The other thing that's a hurdle there is with all the materials that are needed for those batteries. There's just been a big thing that Tesla did. They got an Australian company. They contract with an Australian company to mine in Africa, to then bring the material to Baton Rouge and then take that to Austin, Texas for lithium. So this is the worldwide supply chain issues that we've got to be moving forward on some of this stuff too. So I apologize, I could go on with that one because that's a big, big deal, but that's kind of a summation of that. I'm all for increasing the mileage though. I think that is a real plus for us to do. And remember, it is airlines also. And going to electrified things for airlines is going to be really difficult, right? And so airlines are one of the biggest things that takes up, or produces CO2 or equivalent emissions that we have.
I see Betty's hand up, and then we'll go to Brian after that.
Hi, just Roger, just two cynical comments from an 82-year-old woman. Number one, those people in Brunswick County beaches that don't want to see the wind turbines, isn't that a trade-off between sea level rise and their waterfront homes? That's my first cynical comment. My second cynical comment is one of the reasons Trump signed the anti-wind farm is he didn't like the wind farm off his Turnberry golf course. And now I'll shut up.
Both of those are true, but I think his moratoria was more in line with trying to garner votes in the 2020 election from North Carolina to Florida, because that doesn't apply. That moratoria doesn't apply north of North Carolina, by the way. It's just in those states that were critical, swing states for what we're looking at. And I'd say, it's legitimate for people to consider the economics of turbines, but there's been several studies in tourism associated with this. One was done at NC State, as a matter of fact. And what they saw was that if you got the opinions, is that about 8 to 10 nautical miles offshore, that was kind of the breakover point where people looked at this and said, well, I'll still come and I'll be a tourist at your location on your beach. But if they were closer than that, that led to a couple of issues associated with tourism and value. So there is indications that people do the right things in most cases.
Okay, Brian.
Yeah, in the comment section of the wind farm presentation, there was a a kind of seismic impacts in the creation of the wind farms. I was just wondering if you could talk more about that and
Yeah,
the validity of it.
Yeah, that's a really important one because
Hey.
we always talk about the seismic impacts with offshore oil and gas, with the vessel, with the crew boats going out and running the air gun surveys, which are high intensity impacts for the marine critters like turtles, whales, and others. It turns out in the wind energy, there is some issues. It's just not the same ones. But I'm going to tell you, if you go out there and you drive pilings into the seafloor, that creates quite a bit of energy and sound. So what can you do? One thing is not the intensity nor the length of time associated with the offshore seismic gun activity, but it is short term. And so there's a couple of mitigation strategies that you can actually do. One of those mitigation strategies is driving those turbines. You can put what we call a bubble curtain around it to dampen the sound. So if I've got bubbles on the outside, I'm pile driving in the middle, those bubbles dampen that sound effect going outward. The other one is if I've got a pylon, what I can do is I put a casing, hollow casing down into the seafloor. And then what I do is I put my monopile down in the middle of that. And then I drive inside of that casing. When I do that, I've got a water dampening effect to reduce that noise factor too, going away from that driving of that pile. So there's multiple things that you can do with this. I will say too that, I've looked at the sound a lot, and I did work in the energy industry. And when people talk about some of the impacts of some of the seismic testing, I don't believe we have all the information in yet. I'm certainly, one of those that I like to see information, and there's certainly impacts, but some of the impacts like, beaching whales and things, that is not related to seismic testing. It's not been shown that that is a result of seismic testing at all offshore. You do have ones whenever you like to, impact them, because obviously sound is huge. So I think we just need a lot more studies on that. But also, if we move to looking at wind and solar and some of these things, then we need less of that offshore to start with.
So Roger, I have a question for people who are opposed. I've spoke with people who are opposed to moving towards electric vehicles because they cite this, the use of the batteries and the materials that are in batteries. My husband drives an electric vehicle, but what would be your response to those folks, I guess?
I've got another one.
Well, I think one of the things that you look at, there are trade-offs in life. And one of the things that you need to do is to think about, greatest harm. And when you think about greatest harm, when you look at it, you think about what the consequences are for yourself, for your community, and globally. And in looking at that, one of the things I would say is that it appears to me that utilizing things that are more renewable, and I weigh it out, has a lot more benefits than those things that doing business as usual. And so the recycling of batteries and materials in solars and wind farms, that's a really huge issue. But one of the things I look at is that, we have lots of technology that can be brought to bear to be able to recycle at least most of those materials. It's got to be a commitment. It may be an increase in money that you would be paid. You may have to end up paying a little bit more than the gasoline. But on the other hand, what is the benefit of that? And I believe the benefits, the consequences and risk going forward, if we don't do some of these things, are much greater than, having to worry about, the recycling of those batteries and all those other, elements that, are part and parcel. Rare earth elements as one example of all of these materials. And I think, if we could get to the point of understanding some of that recycling and repurposing, if you will, of those, then we'd be able to address that in a lot better fashion. I think reducing our transportation volume, since it is the biggest emitter, is something that's worthy of our effort.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other questions for Roger? I see Brian's hand up.
Yeah, let me turn my video back on. Excuse me, sorry. Just a kind of more of a philosophical question about something you just said, where a lot of these things are better than business as usual. But is it a radical enough change for fill in the blank, I guess? As far as, more of a reduction philosophy instead of just changing our technological views to maintain the energy sources we have now, or energy requirements we have now.
Yeah, right. I think that's a really good question. I think one of the things we really need to look at is that people always cite you as an above all energy strategy. Well, I totally believe in above all energy strategy, but my above all energy strategy, that includes fossil fuels and renewables, nuclear, geothermal. I think the important thing to do is to transition faster than we are. And that transition faster than we are from, oil and gas means that we need to do more, with the renewables. But one way to get there too, I'm serious, is conservation and efficiencies. In this country, one of the things that we could look at is we could easily save 10 to 20% of our energy with conservation and efficiencies. Some of the bills that have been put in place or trying to be put in place now is to lead to weatherization, insulation, and protection of low-income areas. Governor Cooper put in a mandate that government buildings would be more energy efficient. And so if we did all those things, I think that reduces that demand, and therefore the part of the demand that goes to fossil fuels would be ones that could reduce that volume. So business as usual changes, and I'm point to the mitigation strategies that really go with the IPCC data. We don't need to be at even the 4.6 nor the 8.5 representative concentration pathways for producing emissions. We need to be down at the 2.6 to 3 area that really reduces those emissions. And even then, moving forward, it's not going to reduce the amount. It's going to keep us from going any higher, or at least much higher, in both energy usage and emissions. But it's a difficult sell. Whenever your industry and whenever your country is been doing something for a long time, it's difficult to move the ship in a different direction. And I think we need to push harder. We need some more tugs out there moving the ship in a different direction myself.
Yeah, and just one more point of concern is that thing you said about Tesla partnering with an Australian company to mine in Africa. It's always important for us to remember that how's that affecting the individuals in Africa, and is that money staying there? And same thing here with mining on indigenous properties and all that stuff. And that's just me and my soapbox. That's it.
No, and Brian, that's why I brought that up, is because there is impacts globally, and people look at different things. there's several mines that have been suggested to be open, but have not been open because of arguments of impact and ecological concerns. Well, then they move them to Africa. So right now in Nevada, there's some really big time mines being considered for lithium and other materials that are necessary. Well, Jennifer Granholm was out there. And so as she was announcing a mission to increase our production in the United States with lithium and materials for batteries, there were two areas, one in an indigenous area and another one near an ecologically sensitive area that were being considered. And the people there were protesting that we're not going to open these up. So it's really a difficult thing. It is not easy to go into an area. I'd say that's true, in the United States. There are so many different opinions, but sometimes I'll just say we have to look at things and make choices. We're really poor at making choices. It either becomes an either or factor in this country. We need compromise. It's just like compromise for the offshore wind. You need to compromise that I'll take it at 15 nautical miles, even though I can see it a little bit, just because I think it's good for the benefit of the community in the country. And too many times, we just look at things and say what is or isn't. It's the same thing for the Point Peter area. I'm not against development. I'm just against, not doing, I'm actually for doing something that is smart development in an area where I'm worried about, infrastructure and taxes and safety, being compromised because we're putting something in that, is not the best use of the land. And you get me on my soapbox if you're.
Yeah, well, that's a good reminder too, to everybody on this call that if you have to voice your opinion and send letters to the council members, that the Point Peter is something that's being discussed in Leland and Wilmington, and make those phone calls, send those emails, go out to those meetings if you can and speak. So all important to be involved. And then Diane, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, yeah, all great information. This has been such a fantastic presentation. And I was just wondering, I'm a co-chair with the Climate Reality Project in Raleigh. And I was wondering, I was thinking some of these slides would be really beneficial for our people that give presentations. And I was wondering if we would be able to get access to some of them somehow.
So we will be posting the recording of this on our YouTube and Facebook pages, but Roger, I'm not sure if you'd also be willing to send slides. We can post those as well.
What I prefer to do is to have people ask me for particular ones that might be good as opposed to just a wholesale presentation, because one of the things that I like to make sure of is the context of whatever that slide is trying to show. So Diane, I'd be happy to talk with you. That was Diane, right?
Yes, great. That would be great. Yeah, I just think some of the ones that are exhibiting the, rise in water in certain areas, I think those would be really beneficial to
Okay, Diane, just let me know, send me a note and we can talk. Same thing for anybody else. I'm in the area to stay, so I'm not going anywhere, I don't think. At least I hope.
Fantastic, thank you. Is there an email address or to somebody that we can get a hold of you?
Marissa, could you post my email in your chat?
Yep, sure thing. I'll do that.
Thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate you guys being here all this long. I'll stay as long as people want to ask questions. I love questions more than presenting, and I really love presenting. So it's just let me know. But if there's questions afterwards too, I'd certainly be happy to try and address those as well. Like I say, I've got a lot more slides.
I did see a question pop up in the chat, which I don't think gone over yet. How do you see the impact of Russian sanctions on fuels impacting our movement to more renewables? Will it speed up the process?
And by the way, hello, Patty. Good to see you. One of the things with this, that goes two ways, as a matter of fact. One of them is that it slows renewable simply because people are going to be looking at, supplementing what's going on to replace fuels coming from Russia. So there's already been a big push, as you've heard in Congress, to up our game for oil and gas production and coal production to offset some of this. But what I would say to those folks is, we're already producing more gas, as I mentioned to you, but we ship more LNG, liquefied natural gas today than we've ever done. I'm telling you, forever. So we're moving more out of this country right now than any time in the past. So European Union and others, that are so dependent upon this, they're going to have to find other sources. So one of the things that's happened, I mentioned Boris Johnson, he really did say that, we need to up our game to try to replace some of our dependency on this, 40% of electricity needs coming from natural gas coming from Russia. So it could actually push us in that direction as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag. We'll have to see, which one wins out. A lot of these short-term things that people are doing, for instance, Biden, opening up 180 million barrels of crude oil from our strategic petroleum reserve. That particular thing that you're looking at, that is really short-term. In my opinion, that's not the best use of that fuel. But, politics enters into things. And so what you're looking at is to reduce, gas by 10 to 20 cents a gallon. It's a popular move for folks. People see their pocketbook issues as a driving thing. And, I totally understand it. But again, this is one of those cases where I think that we need to take a long view and understand things of what needs are in this country. So that's, that's a long-winded one as well. But, as I say, mixed bag on many of these things.
Roger, politicians never look beyond the next election.
That's an axiom in science. If you want to get something done, politics is not the way to do it. So it's a difficult matter. I mean, these guys have tough decisions to make, really tough decisions, and I feel for them sometimes. Not enough to have a lot of sympathy, but I do feel for them.
All right. Well, I think we are going to wrap up here, but we did drop Roger's email in the chat. So if you guys do have any follow-up questions, feel free to shoot him an email or contact us at Riverwatch. We'll pass it along. Thanks everybody for joining today, and we hope you join for some of our future Riverwatch events. Have a great weekend.
Thanks a lot, guys. Get out and enjoy the day.